You might be familiar with these images from the southern US border, immigrants en masse crossing without documents. But did you know that this was also happening at the northern US border? Immigrants have been crossing from the US into Canada in record numbers in the past year. Now, this border is closed too. And the thousands of immigrants that have already entered the US with Canada in mind as their final goal are stuck on the streets of northern US cities like Buffalo, New York, and Portland in Maine. So is this the site of the United States' next immigrant crisis?
These migrants were in Mexico until recently. They lived there under very poor conditions until they had enough and crossed over to the United States, most of them without documents.
If someone is detained trying to cross the border between ports of entry, between legal entry points, they can now be deported to their country of origin, which is a lot tougher, actually. At the same time, opened up appointments at ports of entry for people to come in and apply for asylum, and they're taking in 1,450 people a day, which is, when you add it up, is actually quite a large number of people.
These men have been walking for months, crossing almost 8 countries from Venezuela with just one goal in mind: to get into the United States. But their problems don't end once they are here.
Sí tenemos miedo, pero imagínese, ve cómo estoy, no puedo ni caminar, no puedo hacer nada. Vengo paso a paso. Yo de verdad, si me vienen a agarrar, no puedo ni correr.
Some have already left to New York, to Chicago, or to Denver in Colorado. And from there, they are planning to move even more towards north, to the border with Canada. How is Canada reacting to this situation?
The line separating the US and Canada is the world's longest unprotected international border. The total boundary of almost 9,000 kilometers between the two countries has around 100 official ports of entry, and between them, many unofficial crossings, like this one, known as Roxham Road, which lies at the border between New York State and the Canadian province of Quebec.
So this is the path that the migrants used to take to cross to Canada. They would walk down this way, they would be processed over there at that facility, but now this is the limit. No one is allowed to cross.
The closure of Roxham Road in April, along with all unofficial border crossings, came after months of talks. The reason? The number of immigrants using the US as a transit country to get into Canada had increased tenfold from the year before. In 2021, only 4,000 immigrants entered through unofficial border crossings into Canada. Just 1 year later, in 2022, 40,000 immigrants entered Canada from the US using unofficial border crossings, an all-time record. Now, official crossing points between Canada and the US have been strictly regulated by a treaty known as the Safe Third Country Agreement. Under this agreement, immigrants seeking refugee status must first make their claim in the first safe country they arrive, which would be the US. Unofficial crossing points, like Roxham Road, used to represent a loophole in the regulation.
The Canadians do not want to be the Americans. I mean, there are a lot of similarities between Canadians and Americans, but on immigration, they have kept this out of politics for the most part.
That is until March of this year, when US President visited Canada. At a press conference, Biden and Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced the expansion of the Safe Third Country Agreement to include unofficial crossings as well.
We will now apply the Safe Third Country Agreement to asylum seekers who cross between official points of entry. After midnight tonight, police and border officers will enforce the agreement and return irregular border crossers to the closest port of entry with the United States.
The complete closure of the US-Canadian border for immigrants seeking asylum was issued via executive order. However, it does not have the support of everyone in Ottawa. Some members of the Canadian Parliament were caught by surprise after the executive decision of closing border crossings like the one in Roxham Road. Now they're putting their government under pressure to change this as soon as possible. Jennifer Kwan is a member of the New Democratic Party of Canada. She has been following the Roxham Road matter from the beginning.
I was very dismayed that the Liberal government, the Prime Minister, decided to apply the Safe Third Country Agreement to the entire border between Canada and the United States on land. By doing that, effectively, they shut down the entire border for asylum seekers. And it's really no different than what the Trump administration tried to do by erecting a wall for asylum seekers. In this instance, what the Canadian government has done is to erect an invisible wall to block out asylum seekers.
Canadian left-wing MPs are not the only ones who oppose the deal. Parts of civil society in Canada are also outraged by the decision. Human rights groups like Amnesty International, the Canadian Council for Refugees and others have sued the government for violating part of Canada's Charter of Rights. The case was heard in Canada's Supreme Court, which in June ruled.
The Supreme Court of Canada has unanimously ruled to uphold the Safe Third Country Agreement between Canada and the United States. Now, that agreement makes it illegal for refugees in the United
The blowback was immediate.
Good afternoon, bonjour.
Human rights groups condemned the decision.
The U.S. is not a safe country for refugees. And our organizations have brought overwhelming evidence that sending people who are seeking safety here back to the U.S. causes serious violations of rights that are protected both under the Canadian Charter and international law.
My name is Nakib Sarwari.
Sarwari, originally from Afghanistan, crossed into Canada through Roxham Road 4 years ago, when Afghanistan was one of the 7 Muslim countries whose citizens were banned from visiting the United States, a law also known as Trump's Muslim ban. This is why Sarwari says he chose to go to Canada the unofficial way.
On a Christmas evening, actually, where a lot of people might have Christmas dinner, I was trying to flee into a safe country. That I could have just come through the regular port of entry. I didn't have to take those like really dark and snowy and icy roads in the winter when I was coming to Canada. I could have just taken the regular day as anybody else with a passport could come to the border and cross into Canada. I would have been one of those people, but unfortunately I was not, because I knew that I will be sent back to the United States.
El pueblo unido jamás será vencido.
In Quebec, which borders 4 U.S. states, including New York and Maine, the fight to reopen the border continues. They are demanding that Canada sets an example and goes back to a more humane immigration policy.
In a sense, we're doing in a tiny, tiny, tiny way what refugee claimants are doing, and they cover thousands of kilometers. We'll do 70 kilometers. It's just a tiny approximation, but at least to symbolize what they have experienced, and just to say we're together and we're moving ahead together.
They are starting a 73 kilometers march from Montreal to the crossing point of Roxham Road, where they want to make their voices heard. While in Canada, some are fighting to reopen the border for refugees. In the US, it's creating a bottleneck situation that is getting worse day by day. In Portland, the largest city in Maine, many immigrants are stranded. For most of them, the final goal was Canada, but now the border is closed.
Mês, uma semana, estamos aqui fora. Ninguém está ajudando, ninguém está falando nada. Não tem espaço. Agora nós vamos ir aonde? Nós pensamos que Angola América é país de ajudar, mas aqui não tem ajuda. Nós estamos dormindo fora, está mandar ir para ir na DHS dá papel na DHS não está receber tomorrow, Mondays, tomorrow, temos criança, não tem sítio de viver.
It's also a huge challenge for the helpers, like Mike Guthrie, who manages several shelters in the city.
Oh, it's very difficult. And it's never great to look a family in the face and say, I don't know where you're sleeping tonight, especially when they've come to you for help.
Most of the immigrants here are from Angola, Congo, and Haiti. From southern states like Texas, Arizona, and California, many were transported north on buses. that its conservative governors offered for free in order to make a point. They argue it's to show northern democratic states how it feels to receive so many immigrants at once. However, many decry it as cruel political weapon. Often, the immigrants arrive not knowing where to go and end up on the streets. This has happened in New York, in Washington, D.C., and now also in Maine.
If you look at their detention paperwork, we have people coming from Texas, Arizona, Southern California. If they're sending us 1,000, but they just had 20,000 cross the border, they're trying to relieve the pressure on themselves. The system we have isn't working if this is the end result.
Et donc, en répondant ici, par exemple, ça.
As a lawyer, Mardoki Mbongi helps them to start the asylum procedure. Once a refugee, he is now one of the representatives of the Congolese community in Portland.
Before, if you have 100 asylum seekers arriving here, probably 30 of them or 40 will be crossing the borders towards Canada. Nowadays, they can't cross the border because it's closed. Now, they are forced to start their process here as they have to stay.
In Portland City Hall, its mayor is also addressing the crisis.
We've been trying to problem solve the issue of emergency shelter for quite some time, and it will not stop tonight. We need housing for families, we need housing for individuals, we need emergency shelter for both of those populations. So the fact that we have an agreement before us tonight is the culmination of a lot of consistent work and ongoing work.
Voting on a new emergency shelter for 180 immigrants, the proposal passes 8-1. A single conservative member of the council votes against it, and he is not alone.
This is the building that will become the new shelter for migrants only. 180 beds will be installed in there. A quick solution for the current problem in Portland. However, this is also awakening critics in this area.
What is it that really bothers me is my lack of privacy. I live on a dead-end street. I have the woods behind me. I have a large backyard for my family and my animals. And I feel as though 180 people over there will disrupt, and I will lose my privacy off my deck because it's sort of like that's what I see.
If the government said they don't have a space for them, why they allow them to come to this country, here in this state? There are so many states they can live on. Texas is a big place. Arizona is big. California is big. Maine is a very small place. We don't need so many people here.
I think we're facing a moment where asylum systems really are under siege around the world. And I think there's a real risk that we could actually lose the right to asylum if they become too overburdened and too broad. What you're seeing is an attempt by countries that believe in protection, like the Canadian government, and I think this administration in the US as well, trying to make them a little more rigorous is one way of ensuring credibility and ensuring political support down the road.
A crisis that can only be fixed by changing the broken immigration system. In the meantime, it will be the same old sound.